Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Before starting, I would like to make a legal statement. All statements expressed by Getúlio Vargas Foundation's employees and guests in our online events and broadcasts exclusively represent their opinions and not necessarily FGV's institutional position. We also reiterate that everyone present here agreed to participate in this event of their own free will, and they consented to be recorded in this broadcast, which will be posted later on FGV's official channels. My name is Mariana Trigo. I am a journalist at FGV International Intelligence Unit. We are pleased to hold this webinar about Australia, and we are privileged to have the Honorable Timothy Kane, Ambassador of Australia in Brazil, present with us today. The Focus on Asia project aims to offer the public a magnifying glass to read relevant issues, offering a comprehensive view of the diverse opportunities, partnerships, and differences between our country and Asian nations. And today, our focus is on Australia. Before talking to an ambassador, I would like to introduce Professor Renato Flores, the director of the FGV International Intelligence Unit and professor at the Graduate School of Economics at FGV. Professor, thank you for your company today. Would you like to say a few words?
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here once again in a new interview in our Focus on Asia project. Focus on Asia is an initiative of our think tank. We are a small think tank within a bigger think tank, which is FGV. And Focus on Asia, I was saying, is an initiative we developed in order to present and make Asia more present in the Brazilian's mind. The center of the world has been slowly moving to Asia, and everybody, particularly in a middle power, at least regionally, in a middle power like Brazil is, we must be aware of Asia, and we must understand Asia in all its peculiarities. For instance, today we are going to learn about a most important country, a very relevant economy, an economy which in many sectors is a competitor to us, a friendly competitor, so we hope to enhance our cooperation in certain Australian economic sectors. And it's a country which speaks English in the core of Asia. It's a key country in the area. It's a country, for instance, close to Timor, which is the newest country in which Portuguese is the mother tongue. So Australia plays a very important role in the area, and we must get to know the country. It's a country which has a wonderful educational system, for example, and which may be an alternative for PhDs, for master courses, for our students who want to go abroad for a graduate diploma in an institution where English is the spoken language. So there are many issues, and the ambassador, of course, is the qualified person to talk about them, to discuss. And so today I invite everybody to to plunge into Australia so that you can leave the interview with a better knowledge of this country, which is the basic idea of focus on Asia. I must also thank very much in my name and in the name of the president of FGV, Professor Carlos Ivan Simons Leal, our dear Ambassador Kane. Ambassador Kane is a wonderful person. He has been having a fantastic performance here in Brazil. I haven't met anybody who wouldn't say only wonderful things about the ambassador. He's well loved, he is admired by everybody. So I think that Ambassador Kane is making a fantastic job for Australia in Brazil. Thank you very much, Ambassador. And it's only because the idea of these interviews are to be in English that we are conducting it in English, because the ambassador could easily speak in a wonderful Portuguese. But as this is supposed to be an international event, so that we can spread this information according to the idea of my unity and the idea of the international area of FGV, we are going to use English. But beware that the ambassador, if you think anything in Portuguese, the ambassador will read your mind and he will understand. Ambassador, thank you very much for being here with us, for sharing this hour with us. You are most welcome, and we are very grateful to you. Thank you very much. I'm sure we are going to have a wonderful conversation. Welcome.
Ambassador Kane, we are really honored to have you here, and we'll give a brief presentation of your professional journey. Ambassador Timothy Kane is a career diplomat in the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Commerce. He started as Australian ambassador to Brazil in November 2018. Previously, he served as charge of business at the Australian Embassy in Madrid, ambassador of Australia in Chile and Colombia, Ecuador and Venezuela, as well as political advisor at the Embassy of Australia in Washington. First secretary at the Australian Embassy in Mexico City, and second secretary and vice consul at the Australian Embassy in Santiago de Chile. Australia has a mix between the Western and the Eastern. It's a country rich in history and traditions. Furthermore, Australia has a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentarism system of government, having Queen Elizabeth II as Queen of Australia. In other words, a country with many stories to tell. We would like you, Ambassador, to give a brief overview of Australia, a country so vast and rich with a history of immigration and strongly committed to multilateralism.
Well, good morning, Professor Flores, and good morning, Senora Mariana, and good morning to everybody else participating in this event this morning. It's a great honour for me to be with you this morning. I have the utmost respect and admiration for FGV. Our association with you is not just from the embassy, but from Australia, is extensive, and we are doing what we can to enhance that. So for you to invite me to be with you this morning is most definitely an honour, and I'm very grateful. Professor, let me say, you may need to speak to more people in Brazil if you're only hearing the good things, because I'm sure some would not necessarily share that. And my Portuguese, well, I get by, as we say, but I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in English. I do what I can. I think it's very important for us as diplomats in your country to speak in the language of Brazil. But I do understand the international nature of the International Intelligence Unit program and FGV's program. So thank you again for that opportunity. With your indulgence, I'm very happy now to give something of an overview, which gives the listeners and the viewers something of an idea of Australia, some statistics, and also just a little bit of where our relations with Brazil are at. So I'm happy to begin that now, and it's just a couple of minutes, if that's agreeable to you.
Ambassador, in 2020, Brazil and Australia celebrated 75 years of diplomatic relations with promising prospects. The Brazilian community is the largest among Latin Americans in Australia and has grown more than 800% since 2001. Brazilian Portuguese is commonly heard spoken in Sydney and in the country's main cities. The contribution of Brazilian can be found in several areas, from biomedicine to agriculture. How has Australia built such a relationship with Brazil, mainly through its youth, and how can we deepen and expand this achievement?
Thank you very much, Mariana. Let me begin my remarks by extending my congratulations to you as an organisation. EAESP is Latin America's best business school and one of the best in the world. FGV's history is illustrious, and your future shines as one of the most promising teaching and research institutions in the world. Parabéns. Just a few statistics about Australia. We are the world's 13th largest economy with a GDP of $1.4 trillion US. We have a population of approximately 26 million people. Almost 50% of that population are either migrants or the children of migrants. We are the most multicultural nation on earth. There are over 130 languages in Australia. Until the COVID-19 pandemic, we had 29 years of consecutive economic growth in Australia, a record among developed economies. We have the 6th largest pool of investment funds under management in the world. Australia is one of only 9 nations with a AAA credit rating from all key international ratings agencies. 3.2 million Australians speak an Asian language, and 1.4 million speak a European language, including Portuguese. Australia advocates for a world order safe for liberal democracy to flourish, free from coercion, reinforced through positive, collaborative, and coordinated action. The Australian government set out in detail our foreign and international trade policies in a foreign policy white paper published in 2017. The white paper identifies 5 objectives for Australia's security and prosperity. These are to 1, promote an open, inclusive and prosperous Indo-Pacific region in which the rights of all states are respected. We define the Indo-Pacific as the region ranging from the Eastern Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, connected by Southeast Asia including India, North Asia, and the United States. 2, to deliver more opportunities for our businesses globally and stand against protectionism. 3, ensure Australians remain safe, secure, and free in the face of threats such as terrorism. 4, promote and protect the international rules that support stability and prosperity and enable cooperation to tackle global challenges. And 5, to step up support for a more resilient Pacific and in Timor-Leste. While the Indo-Pacific is of primary importance to Australia, these priorities also reflect the global scope of our national interests and foreign policy. As Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said just recently, our challenge is nothing less than to reinforce, renovate, and buttress a world order that favours freedom. We, like Brazil and many other countries, are also responding to issues such as the rise of inequality globally, the challenge of climate change and reaching net zero emissions, and the rapid advance of the internet and artificial intelligence. It goes without saying that an existential threat to the global system is posed by unexpected factors such as COVID-19. It is a reminder of how such threats can challenge us severely, even as we commence the third decade of the 21st century. As at late June this year, there have been 30,566 confirmed cases of the virus in Australia, and tragically 910 people have died from the coronavirus. The United States remains Australia's most important ally. As the Prime Minister has said, our alliance with the United States is our past, our present, and our future. It is the bedrock of our security. And Australia believes deep US engagement in the Indo-Pacific is essential for maintaining stability and prosperity. Australia welcomes the impressive development of China in recent decades. It is the world's second largest economy. It now accounts for over 16% of global GDP. It is the world's largest goods exporter, the largest trading nation, the largest manufacturer, has the world's largest banking sector, and the world's second largest stock market. China is a global power. It is the world's major buyer of resources. Think of Brazilian soy and iron ore exports. Australia has a free trade agreement with China, and Australia is home to 1.2 million ethnic Chinese. The relationship is broad and deep. Australia does not have to choose between the United States and China. We seek to continue to maintain the good relationships we have with both countries and move forward together as partners in our Indo-Pacific region. Of course, Australia maintains close and deepening relations with other Indo-Pacific countries such as India, Japan, Indonesia, and South Korea. We see the 10 members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, as the core of our conception of the Indo-Pacific. We are building stronger economic partnerships with and finding new opportunities in Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. Australia will remain committed to working with Papua New Guinea, other Pacific Island countries, and Timor-Leste to support their economic growth and governance. Australia will support reforms that give new and emerging powers a greater role in the international system. Some change to institutions and patterns of global cooperation is inevitable, necessary, and appropriate to reflect the greater weight of countries such as Brazil, China, Indonesia, India, and Nigeria. We have concluded or are negotiating trade deals with 17 of our top 20 trading partners. 1 in 5 Australian jobs is now dependent on international trade. 70% of Australia's two-way trade is now covered by our trade agreements, which have increased from 26% since 2013. 15 of the 16 members of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, have concluded text-based negotiations of that agreement, and Australia expects to ratify RCEP later this year. We are learning from Brazil and other Mercosur members in our FTA negotiations with the European Union. We are also finalising an FTA with the United Kingdom. You will know that Australia was a very active player in the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, which resulted in the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP. As Mariana has noted, we celebrated 75 years of diplomatic relations with Brazil last year. This significant milestone allowed us to take stock of our relationship and identify new pathways and priorities to enhance it. Latin America also remains important to achieving our objectives in the multilateral system, including in peacekeeping, conflict prevention, and responding to humanitarian crises. We have free trade agreements with Peru and Chile, and we are negotiating an FTA with the 4-member Pacific Alliance, and have already negotiated an FTA with Mexico in the context of the CPTPP. We want to deepen our trade and investment dialogue with Mercosur countries. We are not in a position to negotiate an FTA with Mercosur for the time being, but we are looking at what we can do around an FTA to enhance opportunities for Brazilian and Australian business people and exporters. We need to consider initiatives such as a double taxation agreement. Australian investors and businesses are responding to opportunities in Brazil, and we are seeing more Australian interest and investment here, including in areas to support the world's energy transition, such as in green hydrogen. Brazil is Australia's largest export market in Latin America, including in tourism, travel, and education-related services, and accounts for half of Australia's direct investment in the region. Brazil is Australia's 5th largest market for international students and the largest outside of Asia. In 2018, 40,000 Brazilian students were enrolled in Australian educational institutions. There are more than 110 active agreements between Australian educational institutions and Brazilian government and educational institutions. Australia and Brazil cooperate multilaterally in the United Nations and in the G20, and on issues of mutual interest, such as agricultural trade reform through the Cairns Group and the World Trade Organization. Australia supports Brazil's membership of the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. Brazil is one of Australia's largest trading partners in Latin America, with a two-way trade of $2.2 billion in financial year 2020. Major Australian exports to Brazil include coal, aluminium, cereal, and education-related travel. Major imports from Brazil include medicaments, civil engineering equipment, coffee, pulp and waste paper, and personal travel services. There are more than 70 Australian companies with a presence in Brazil. There are particular opportunities for our companies in Brazil in areas such as information technology, biotechnology, transportation and logistics, mining, water and waste management, renewable energy, education, tropical medicine, science and agribusiness, retail, tourism and infrastructure. We have signed memoranda of understanding with Brazil in the last few years in areas such as water cooperation, scientific engagement and collaboration. And we hope to finalise soon a work and holiday maker MOU to allow young Brazilians and Australians to work and travel in each other's countries. We can and are doing more to enrich the relationship bilaterally and internationally. I'm happy to answer a bit more on tourism, but I'm also happy to move on, Mariano, however you'd like to continue with the event.
Okay. Professor Renato, would you like to say?
Ambassador, if you have more to say, please do continue. There's no problem.
Yes,
yes, we have no limits. Feel free.
Okay. All right. Thank you. It's important to share with you that Brazilians now form the largest migrant group from Latin America resident in Australia. Australia had an estimated approximately 50,000 Brazilian-born residents in Australia in 2018. That's an increase of over 800% since 2001. Brazilians and Australians share many passions, and these are just some of them. A love of sport, churrascos or barbecues, being outside, music, nature, beaches. There are many cultural affinities. Like Brazil, Australia is a multicultural country. There is no question that Brazilians adapt very quickly in Australia, feeling at home, to the point where we have life-saving clubs in Sydney of Brazilians who live there. Australia also contributes to development projects in Brazil, helping to foster people-to-people links. Through our direct aid program, we provide financial support to a range of projects in Brazil. Just some of them in 2019-20 included pandemic response initiatives, poverty alleviation, Venezuelan refugee assistance, Amazon bioeconomy assistance, and promoting employment for female ex-prisoners. This year, we continue to support many of the same projects and orient our aid towards areas that need it most, such as helping with food assistance and some education in the favelas. Brazil's large resource-rich economy and growing middle class present trade and investment opportunities in areas that I've mentioned previously. And Australian businesses are certainly taking up some of those opportunities. In the recent past, we've seen significant investments in green hydrogen. A big project up in Ceará has been announced. Other projects are being explored in the state of Rio de Janeiro. In addition to that, we're seeing more interest in sustainable mining. We're seeing more interest in retail with brands such as Cotton On here in Brazil, and also, of course, Seek.com, which is an employment service based online, carsales.com as well. So Australia fully understands the excellent opportunities that this huge market presents to us. Key sanitation reforms in Brazil in the year 2020 have further garnered the interest of Australian companies, and we're looking to do more in that area and also in infrastructure, roads in particular, and as I've mentioned, the energy transition. The future for increased renewable energy in Brazil is, of course, very large. More than half of Australia's foreign direct investment in Latin America is in Brazil, and it remains one of our largest sources of international students, despite the impact of the pandemic. Brazil's world-class agribusiness sector, which accounts for around 1/4 of your GDP, and growing energy, mining, and other opportunities are expanding our bilateral trade and investment. 70 Australian companies and more are now doing business in Brazil. I've mentioned some of those previously, and we expect that to continue. Interestingly, that interest has not subsided during the pandemic. Just as we've all had to adapt to the virtual world, so have our businesses, and meetings have continued to be conducted and opportunities developed. But it's not just a one-way street. Brazilian companies continue to expand operations and invest in Australia, and they are also taking advantage of Australia's extensive free trade agreement network in Asia. Fertiliser companies such as Spraytech recently opened up in Perth. Renewable energy company Grupo Energia is now in Melbourne, and digital service providers such as CI&T established a presence last year. Minerva Foods has announced its interest in investing in meat processing facilities in Western Australia. And of course, JBS remains the largest Brazilian investor in Australia. It employs approximately 11,000 Australians at 47 plants throughout Australia, and its assets are estimated to be more than $5 billion. Just recently, this month, in fact, it was announced that JBS had purchased Australian pig meat company Riverlea. That's an investment of $135 million. Other Brazilian companies also have a presence. Natura purchased Australia's well-known skincare company, Aesop. Marco Polo owns Australian bus manufacturer, Volvo. The scale of Brazil's food and beverage industry offers openings for niche Australian products across the processed and packaged food supply chains. In 2019, Brazil imported $13.8 billion in agricultural commodities. We're also exploring opportunities for Australian grains, dairy products, seafood, edible oils, wine, and seeds for propagation. Australia already exports picanha to Brazil. Brazil is the main supplier of coffee to us, as I've mentioned, and that was around 22,000 tonnes in 2019. We are continuing to engage with Brazil and other Mercosur members through the Australia-New Zealand Closer Economic Relations and Mercosur Dialogue, and bilaterally to strengthen our trade and investment ties. I'll pause there because that's, please, floor is yours.
Ambassador, thank you very much. I've learned a lot, and I thought I knew about Australia, but your talk has been very enlightening. So I can't miss the opportunity to ask you a few questions, 2 or 3 details, if you could add some more information, because these are sectors which I think are very interesting for our 2 countries. And I would like to hear your views. The first sector is mining. You mentioned a few times that there is ongoing cooperation in mining. I think that we, together with Australia, Canada, and the US, also, of course, there is also Peru, but we are big mining countries. Mining is a very important sector, and mining will become a big issue now with the green economy. We know that both in the administrative area, in which, for instance, the regulation and coordination of mining projects varies from countries to countries, and sometimes administrative issues eventually cause problems, even environmental problems, but also in the physical, in the activity itself, which has been improving. Australia, pioneer in proposing codes of conduct for mining. We worked with a few years ago with German funds, also in proposing codes of conduct for the mining sector. And I think this is an area where there should, at least in my view, exist a strong cooperation between Brazil and Australia, not only in the exchange of good practices, of course, because each country has its own objective, but there could be a greater exchange of good practices, and also in the international arena in terms of harmonizing and in terms of enlarging global codes of conduct, particularly as regards the environmental issues for the mining sector. So my first question, if you could say a few more words about this, what do you think? Would you have some extra information on this? Because it's I think that I mentioned at the beginning, a bit teasing our dear ambassador, that we are competitors in some sectors, but competitors don't need to be rivals. So we can have harmonized, coordinated actions. And I think mining is a wonderful example of this. We could be 3 times more powerful if we join forces in terms of exchanges, more soft power and ideas than physical exports, imports in this area. What do you think? Would you perhaps have an extra information on this for us?
No, a very good question, Professor. And I can tell you that is already underway, and our collaboration with Brazil in mining has increased significantly in the last few years. This month, very recently, we've had a number of seminars with the Ministry of Mines and Energy, which cater to things such as sustainable mining, but also we're looking at the issue of tailings. We know how challenging that can be. We're looking at renewable energy in the mining context as well. So the cooperation has increased. We are also very keen for Australian investors interested in the mining and energy sector in Brazil to have more of an open dialogue with the Ministry of Mines and Energy. And may I say that Minister Bento Albuquerque and also Secretary Vigigal have been very responsive. And that relationship we have with the Ministry of Mines and Energies has been quite simply outstanding. So we are looking at the sustainable mining, we're looking at the licensing, we're looking at regulatory assistance, whatever we can do to help. And also, of course, we learn from Brazil. You are absolutely right in terms of what renewable energy means for mining. And you've only got to look at the number of minerals that are used in assets to create renewable energy. And if you just look at copper, for example, the demand is extraordinary. So these offer enormous potential for the Brazilian mining sector, and that is not lost on Australian investors. Some Australian mining companies have also invested in Brazil. We expect that to continue. We also expect, for example, some Brazilian investment, particularly in mining services, equipment and technology in Australia. So we want to encourage that two-way flow. We have other companies here now that are specialising in safety and security in the Brazilian mining sector. So speaking personally, I see that sector as one of enormous potential bilaterally for us going forward. And that's, you know, for environmental reasons, for sustainable mining reasons, because of renewable energy, all of these sorts of things. And we want to do what we can to constructively develop the mining sector in Brazil. But I can assure you it's definitely underway.
Wonderful, wonderful. Ambassador, thank you very much. I think this is a sector we are going to explore further in our Focus on Asia project. And your answer has been very encouraging. I'm very happy. I didn't know that relations with the ministry were so close. This is very good news. And probably we're going to pursue this, and maybe we'll need your help later on this, because I think this is, and as you said, not only Brazil, I think this is an area in South America where Australia can play a major role, because, you know, you have a lot of goodwill. Nobody has anything against Australia, so you have easy entry in South America, and you can be very handy, very helpful in this. If we join forces in mining, which, as you said, as I said, is going to be a crucial sector with this green economy, we should maybe preempt things that may happen to the sector. And if we join forces, this is a wonderful news. My second sector, Ambassador, which is a delightful sector, if you allow me, has to do with the wine industry. I think, in my view, I've studied a bit the wine business in the world. I think the Australian model is the best model of regarding producers of the New World. You know that there is, which is related to yours, there's the New Zealand model, there is the US model, very powerful, nowadays very diversified. But I think that the Australian model, the Australian sector, which has size, so not a small sector, it has size, is the one which has more similarities with Brazil, of course, given their separate individual histories. So Brazil, we have a booming wine sector. We produce, if you allow me, we produce decent reds. We produce not so decent whites, but good whites. You produce outstanding whites, very good. You produce very good reds also. We produce very good sparkling wine. I wonder, I don't think that Australia produces much sparkling wine.
We do,
The
Professor.
organization of the ventures, the exchange Australian producers and Brazilian producers. Of course, I know that Australian producers are very busy. You have a world market, we find Australian wine everywhere. So maybe there isn't much interest in joining forces, a relationship with the Brazilian sector. But I think, and I think our industry is very good. We have, we know for export wine experts, people who go and give consulting to Chile, to other countries, how to improve your vineyard and all that. And I think that there could be this kind of interaction with Australia, again, given the goodwill that Australia has here, given the very good image of the Australian wine, the presence, but it's not an aggressive presence. So I don't know how these things are. I would be grateful if you could say something. Are you aware of this? What do you think? Do you know whether any ventures or whether any interest exists between the two sectors in our two countries?
Yes, no, absolutely. And thank you for the question. Let me say, the Brazilian wines that I've had have been superb. You have particular expertise, in my opinion, in sparkling wine. And some of the sparkling wines from Brazil are simply outstanding. So the future for the wine industry in Brazil, again, it's a personal opinion, but I think the future is not only promising, but I think there is enormous potential, potential.
Yes.
There certainly is interest in cooperating with Brazil. We are keen to provide more Australian wine into the Brazilian market. What is here is very limited. It can be quite expensive for the wine that it is. We need to introduce Brazilian consumers to a much wider variety of Australian wine. We do have pretty good expertise in sparkling as well, reds, whites, etc. So we are actually looking at that at the moment. It's not easy for a variety of reasons, including, for example, the interest of our exporters and with other markets. So we want them to take another look at the Brazilian market. I don't know in terms of investment in the Brazilian wine sector from Australia going forward, but certainly there will be increased cooperation as new world wine countries. That is inevitable. We do the same thing with countries such as South Africa, the United States, Uruguay, Chile, Argentina. There may be Australian investment in the Brazilian wine sector going forward. I hope there will be. I think we can learn a lot from each other.
Yes.
But even in my time here, which has almost been 3 years, I've seen the development of the sector in Brazil. And bearing in mind that has also happened for almost half of that time during the pandemic. So, as I say, for me personally, you have a pretty bright future in wine in Brazil.
I think so. And I think that there are plenty of opportunities for joint ventures with Australia. I think that the Australian model is closer to ours. Even in historical terms, the migrants and all that. And I think this is an area where there is plenty of scope. But thank you for your kindness. As regards Brazilian wines, I agree that sparkling wine is very good. And let us hope that there is more interaction between these two sectors. Well, I pass the word to Mariana, who I'm afraid has a lot of things to ask you, so be prepared.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ambassador, for so many important informations. Is Australia interested in a bilateral agreement with Brazil to avoid double taxation? What are the obstacles and opportunities to increasing Brazilian exports to Australia and vice versa?
Yes, look, we certainly have heard from Australian business people in Brazil, Brazilian business people in Australia about the importance of a double taxation agreement. There is no doubt that that is a priority for our businesses. And as people know, they can be extraordinarily helpful to business and to increasing investment, etc. They reduce double taxation quite obviously. They also provide security about tax rules. They also address things about the residential status of a taxpayer and the source of income. They prevent tax avoidance and evasion of taxes and various forms of income flows, but they're also very useful in facilitating investment trade, movement of technology, and they're also very good at addressing issues such as withholding tax and providing a structure for addressing that. So, and I'll be very frank, it certainly is a priority. There are a number of those agreements that Australia is looking at either right now or coming up. So just in terms of finding the capacity to take on more for the moment is a little bit challenging for us. But I want to assure you that I am pushing that as hard and fast as I can. And we certainly do hear those messages from business, and we want to respond to that. I think it will take the relationship further, and I think it will be very important for encouraging other companies to come in and work with an existing Australian company here, because it gives a better structure. And that will apply as well to a Brazilian company in Australia that might know of a particular Brazilian company here that can provide expert service or whatever sort of opportunity, and it will encourage more of that. So just as one aspect, one benefit of it, in terms of growing the pie, as we say, in this bilateral relationship, I see a double taxation agreement as crucially important. I can't give a timeline. We're just caught up at the moment in a lot of others, but we are certainly doing what we can to expedite that.
Thank you for your explanation. Ambassador, recently, President Joe Biden met with leaders from Australia, India, and Japan, a core group of countries combining efforts to counter China's growing military and economic power. President Biden said that an Indo-Pacific region free and open is essential for everyone's future. Australia and India also emphasized the importance of a regional security cooperation. What was the importance of this meeting and the possible consequences of this partnership?
Certainly. Well, the Quad, officially it's the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, had its origins after the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. So there is some history there. The virtual summit in March this year was President Biden's first since he assumed the presidency. It was very important. We are the members, Australia, the United States, Japan, and India are four like-minded democracies with a shared positive vision for the Indo-Pacific region and our collective future. The summit was certainly historic in the sense that it sends a message of support for a sovereign, resilient, and stable Indo-Pacific region. At the summit in March, leaders committed to strengthening Quad cooperation on the defining challenges of our time. So to respond to the economic and health impacts of COVID-19, to combat climate change, and to collaborate on critical and emerging technologies, among other challenges. Quad partners also launched a landmark partnership on vaccines to accelerate the pathway out of COVID-19. We want to work together to strengthen equitable vaccine access in the Indo-Pacific region in close coordination with the WHO and COVAX. The Quad is a key pillar of Australia's international agenda. Some of the other issues we've been working on previously include aspects such as maritime security, infrastructure, supply chain resilience, counter-terrorism, humanitarian and disaster relief, cyber, and countering disinformation. There was agreement to set up some working groups. There was a technology working group, and that was a Quad Critical and Emerging Technology Working Group and a Quad Climate Working Group. So, in short, that is some of the latest update, particularly coming out of the summit. And we're also looking forward, of course, to further virtual and hopefully in the not too distant future, in-person meetings. And each member of the Quad is committed to what the Quad wants to do.
Okay, Ambassador, thank you. Changing the subject for beautiful landscapes. Tourism in Australia is one of the main attractions for foreigners, and income from it exceeds $30 billion per year, which places Australia in 11th position among the largest tourist markets on the planet. How has Australia become one of the most desired destinations in the world? And how can we establish relationships and partnerships in the tourism sector between Australia and Brazil?
It's a very good question. Just to put it in some context for you, tourism in Australia directly employs 666,000 people, or 5% of Australia's workforce. Tourism was our fourth largest export industry, accounting for 8.2% of Australia's export earnings. When you look at aspects such as international overnight tourism spend, which is what tourism organisations look at, in 2019, that was 45 billion Australian dollars. In 2019 as well, 61 billion Australian dollars contributed to the national GDP from tourism. In regional areas of Australia, it's worth 4% of GDP and employs 8% of the regional workforce. In the Brazilian context, in 2019, 57,900 Brazilian visitors came to visit us in 2019. 21,300 Australians visited Brazil in 2019. May I say, and may I record my appreciation to the Brazilian government for eliminating visitor visas for Australians in June 2019. We did see an increase in our visitors as a result of that. We fully expect post-pandemic that will continue to increase. So we are also looking at, as I mentioned previously, a work and holiday maker arrangement to allow a greater flow. I keep saying young people, but I mean younger people because we're all young, to work and travel in each other's countries. Once that is in place, we also expect to see an increase in that. We certainly appreciate the contribution of Brazilians in Australia to our services sector. And I mean, for example, the hospitality sector, and that is crucial, of course, to the tourism industry. And I can tell you, in 2019, when I was back in Australia, the person who helped me from the cab to the check-in at the hotel in Sydney was from Porto Alegre. The person working at the counter at the hotel was from Recife. It gives you some idea of that presence in Australia and, quite frankly, the positive outlook, because we feel at home in Brazil, Brazilians feel at home in Australia. And picking up on a point Professor said just now, we don't have any baggage, historical or otherwise, with Brazil. There's just nothing. And as a brand, Australia, fortunately, is a very positive and popular brand in Brazil. But let me say, it's very much the same for Brazil in Australia. It really, you know, culturally, and the impressions we have are of a very warm and open people, an amazing country, you know, and we both share so many similarities. So if you look at that a little bit more granularly, you can certainly see the potential for two-way investment in tourism sectors going forward. And issues around that include issues such as non-stop flights. Now, unfortunately, with the pandemic and what it's done to the airline industry, that's unlikely to happen in the short term. But going forward, a large percentage of the traffic out of South America on LATAM flights from Santiago, a large percentage of the passengers are from Brazil anyway. So as the technology progresses, we know that flying from, say, Sao Paulo to Australia is now possible, non-stop. So we would hope in the future that is something we could look at as well. And these are the sorts of things to turbocharge, in many respects, the tourism sector. Because, of course, for Brazilians, it would be a case of, you know, from Brazil to Asia, one stop via Australia. So, again, I can't give a timeline. It's just too uncertain. But these are the sorts of things that need to be on the radar in the future.
Okay, Ambassador, thank you. Professor, would you like to offer some concluding remarks?
Not exactly concluding remarks. I think that the ambassador has been very clear and we've covered many interesting issues. I would just like to highlight something the ambassador said also during his presentation, which is similar to what we have been exchanging. For instance, when the ambassador talks about tourism, direct flights are very important. I think that it's mandatory sooner or later, as he said. Also, the activity of tour operators later. Now with the pandemic, all this is completely destroyed, but we hope that the sector will recover. So there is a lot of scope. And another thing that the ambassador mentioned is RCEP, this big free trade agreement involving ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, China. This is something, of course, this is a kind of a monster that has started to move. So we know that things take time, but our guess is that this is going to become more and more important. And we need to have different accesses to RCEP because it's a fantastic market. And I do hope that this would be my last remark or a kind of answer. I don't know if the ambassador probably he will like to add something, but I do hope that Australia, in the same way as we discussed regarding the mining sector, the wine sector, tourism, education, and other issues, I do hope that Australia can be a kind of ally of Brazil, can help us to have a deeper penetration in our RCEP, independently, of course, of the ties we have with Indonesia, the ties we have with China, with Japan. We have historical ties with Japan. We were together with Peru, one of the South American countries which received a huge Japanese migration. So we have our own channels, our own ways to communicate and interact with many RCEP members. But it's good to have a new ally is most welcome. So I do hope that Australia, in a two-way relationship, can help us also in having a stronger presence in this RCEP world. The ambassador mentioned JBS. I was amazed to learn the ambassador mentioned 11,000 jobs created by JBS in Australia. So, of course, for JBS being in Australia, this is a fantastic bridge to get to the whole RCEP world. And but JBS is big. Let's think of smaller companies. But I do hope that Australia can also play this role for Brazil. And if the ambassador has some ideas, views, or criticism on this, I would be very happy to hear your views and as a kind of concluding statement before we conclude our event, please.
Yes, no, thank you very much. We're certainly seeing more interest in both the RCEP and also the CPTPP. And just one example of that is the United Kingdom's interest in joining the CPTPP. We remain open to share our experience. I mean, in the Brazilian context, of course, being a member of Mercosur, that is also an important factor in terms of the possibility of engaging with groups such as RCEP, CPTPP, and that's something for Brazil to consider as well. But we have in the past, we will continue to share Australia's experience within the CPTPP and also with RCEP. We certainly are very pleased with those developments. It's important to keep our region, the world, open to free and fair trade. It's very important. So to answer your question as best I can, Professor, we remain open to working with Brazil to answer any questions they may have and also to work with you as you navigate any emerging interest in those groupings. May I say that we work extremely closely with Brazil in the CANS group within the World Trade Organization, which is all about freer trade for agricultural exporting countries. And you've only got to look at that as an example as to how Australia and Brazil can work very effectively together. So it's something that we're very attuned to, and we're happy to work with Brazil on.
That's a very good example, Ambassador. The CARES group was very important for us all, and the good relationship between Brazil and Australia was fundamental. It's a wonderful example. Thank you for reminding us. Very good. Yeah, right. Very good. Thank you.
So, Ambassador, I would like to thank you very much for your presence. We appreciate and have really benefited from your excellent participation in the webinar. And we thank the professor for his important contribution.
Well, for my part, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much again for the invitation to be with you this morning. I am at your disposition if I can help you in any way going forward. And I can only commend to anybody who is not necessarily as familiar with FGV as most of us are, that it is probably the preeminent institution in this country as a think tank and as an educational force for the sorts of foreign and trade policy issues that we've been looking at this morning. So thank you again, a great pleasure, and all the very best for your future endeavours.
Ambassador, thank you again very much. Muito obrigado. And our dialogue will continue, I'm sure. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much once again for you, for everyone who is joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.